Thank you. What a way to get things started. Appreciate it. What a great crowd. Good evening. Good evening. Thank you. Don't mind a little participation from the audience. My name is Charlton McIlwain. I'm Vice Provost for Faculty Development, Pathways, and Public Interest Technology, and Professor of Media, Culture, and Communication at New York University. I also have the distinguished honor and distinct pleasure to serve as the President of Data and Society's Board of Directors. So whether you're a longtime Data and Society friend or just getting to know us, whether you are on the amazing Data and Society staff or one of our treasured advisors, collaborators, funders, or friends, and whether you're here with us here in my hometown of Brooklyn, New York, or joining us from across the world on the live stream, welcome. Give it up for the live stream, folks. Thank you all for joining us as we celebrate the 10th anniversary of Data and Society. Tonight we're here to celebrate what Data and Society has become, a premier source of rigorous and relevant knowledge, evidence, and insight into the ways that emerging technologies shape and impact the lives of everyday people. A growing force shaping policy about how we regulate and govern algorithmic systems. An organization working to shift the terms of debate and shift power to align technology design and use to the public interest. All of us share a piece of the story of what Data and Society has become over our first 10 years. For me, that story began just over 10 years ago. Now, my memory isn't what it used to be, but that's why we have email. And for me, a delete button that I never, ever use. So the email that started it all for me came on August 19th, 2014. It was sent by Dana Boyd at 6:58 a.m. Noted. Subject line, which was mine catching up. The message in reply simply read, "Hi Charlton, would love to catch up when I'm back." We did finally catch up. There was a lunch at the New York Times cafeteria, an invitation to serve as an advisor. There was the draw of a regular networking event that I'm sure was named just for me. It was called Whiskey Wednesdays. But two brief stories especially speak to what Data and Society mean to me today. The first comes from my first Data and Society workshop called Eclectic Ideas. Any of you remember that one? Papers being workshopped that day included everything from rural marginalization to occult computation, ethical interfaces for electronic health records, to the concept of traceability in the data supply chain. These and many more papers that day modeled what true inter- and cross-disciplinary research looked like, as well as its practical value. The day also included the paper I was assigned specifically to review and engage, titled Critical Data Theory, by Obama Justice Department alum and law professor Margaret Hugh. It was a sprawling 76-page treatise, as law professors are wont to do, arguing that the evolution of big data required a new theoretical lens to critically understand the relationship between digital data, law, and power. And it was brilliant. That experience with Margaret forged a new collaborative relationship that continues to the present day, ranging from sharing a stage just last week at a symposium on AI and marginalized communities at Duke University, to a new collaboration co-editing a 60 manuscript series for Oxford University Press on AI, civil, and human rights, authored by academics policymakers, private sector thought leaders, advocates of various stripes. The second story is a simple one and explains why I deepened my relationship when invited with Data and Society, from participant and advisor to board member and now board president. It was a few days out from my first board meeting, and it was my first opportunity to take a look at what was driving the next few years of the organization through its newly drafted strategy document. I have to admit, I was taken aback a little, in the most positive way imaginable. Then I saw what I read brought to life in the people and the faces who presented that doc at the meeting. The message was clear, and it reflected every part and member of the organization. Technology is our work. Data is our business. But opportunity, shared power, equity, justice, these are our values. Knowledge is what we produce, but people, particularly those who rarely get a say in what technologies exist and how they are used, are why we do the work that we do. So that's my story, and this is Data and Society at 10. And so tonight we'll be looking both backwards and forward. We'll be hearing from our founder, Dana Boyd, and from 4 speakers from across our network who will speak to the theme that we chose for tonight, Foreseeable Futures. Our panelists are all part of Data and Society's past, present, and future, and they will dive into a conversation about how we've seen change happen in our field and how we create our shared future. Then our executive director, Janet Haven, will share her vision for Data and Society's next decade. And then we'll all raise a glass together, and we hope you will stick around for that following the program. So thank you. It is now my honor and pleasure to introduce our first speaker, whose vision and audacity established and set Data and Society on a path to reach the heights we have today. Please join me in welcoming partner researcher at Microsoft Research, distinguished visiting professor at Georgetown University, author of the acclaimed book, It's Complicated, The Social Lives of Network Teams, and much more, Data and Society's intimidable founder, advisor, and friend, Dana Boyd.
Thank you. You're not helping me do this. I'm already nervous. We've already had tears tonight. I'm like, but I adore you. Thank you all so much for coming out. It is beyond an honor to be here with you tonight. And, you know, frankly, it's hard for me to believe it's a decade. The only reason I can feel that it's a decade is that my eldest kid was born aligned with this institution. And so I've gotten to see him grow, and I've got to see the org grow. And, you know, one's rebelling more than the other, but we'll let you work that one out. So I started Data and Society a decade ago because I was deeply concerned about a bunch of conversations that were happening around our socio-technical futures that were being shaped simultaneously by hype and fear and all sorts of ungrounded fantasies about what the future might look like. And as a researcher, I knew that I couldn't solve these problems. I couldn't solve the problems that were manifesting from these places. But I did feel as though there was an opportunity to ground those conversations, to find a way to actually help people think more thoroughly about foreseeable futures, if you will. And in 2014, that was a really, really radical idea. So keep in mind back then that tech was on the West Coast seen as inherently good, right? And there was so much hype and possibility. And few people were seriously reckoning with what I thought of as the entanglements of the good, bad, and ugly. And so I ended up also publishing a book that year that was about teenagers' use of social media, and it was called It's Complicated. And I've come to conclude that that's sort of the story of every project I've ever done. And what is data in society but it's complicated also here, and here, and here, and here. And so my invitation always is to let's figure out how to disentangle those complications. So I wanted to create a space where we could unpack everyday socio-technical realities, bring empirical knowledge to ground things, bring care and nuance, be thoughtful, be engaged with community. And I wanted to ensure that we could build enough collectivity to really attend to those that were most vulnerable and marginalized by these socio-technical realities that were unfolding. And initially, as many of you lived through, I was like, it's all going to be a network. And many of you have dealt with my visions of networks for a while. And then it clearly, with the help of many of you, became clear that we needed an organization. And folks really helped manifest this into something that could have a little bit more structure and staying power. And over time, it also became clear that it needed to actually be something more important, like a field, all sorts of different organizations. And one of the things that gives me so much joy at this point, it's amazing to see data in society. It's even more amazing to see how many other organizations and communities and networks are a part of that. It's not just one group of people, it's collective. And through it all, the North Star was very much really making certain that we could make a more just and inclusive future, and that we could do it in collaboration and together. So none of us wanted to see technologies that would be used to abuse or marginalize, harm, or oppress, although we expected they would come. And indeed, we've gotten to live through that in different ways. But I look back to those days, those heady days when we were there, and I think it's important to acknowledge the ways in which we were collectively right. Many of you showed up to be a part of that, and you took a chance. Many of you showed and moved to New York. You decided that you would participate in something which had no track record. Some of you even chose to fund me, which was crazy, right? And I'm grateful. There are even people in this room, I see you, Josh, that actually built IKEA furniture with me, even though you were supposedly our funder. But I'm grateful because you were all right. You understood that this was something that was important and that we had to build together and collectively. And we needed to create a space where we could think about what was missing in the public discourse around technology. We saw what was needed, we kept building and experimenting and exploring, and all of you here, in one way or another, were a part of this crazy journey. And for that, I am forever grateful. So after the last 10 years, we've brought together these networks, right? And back to my love of networks, of researchers and practitioners, advocates and decision makers, to really ensure that there would be moving information. And that's important because there are certain values that have grounded everything that we've done at Data and Society, the values that are now so intrinsic to the DNA that it's hard to remember that this was a radical thing that we were doing at the time. But those, in addition to the values of justice and the values of inclusion, we thought a lot about the importance of building and maintaining new relationships, finding organizations that we thought could be part of the fold, people who we thought could benefit from being in communication with us. And many of you have been part of those networks. Some of you are from different organizations that we worked with. And that's amazing, because that element, in addition to the organization, just continues to be powerful. Research has never been the answer in my mind, but I do believe it actually grounds conversations in a powerful way, and it gives a place to actually look at things in a new and challenged way. So this is also important to me, especially when there's moments of disagreement, right? Are we disagreeing because our values are different? Are we disagreeing because we have different ideas of evidence and ways of building things? Where is that disagreement, and how can we do that together? And grounding disagreements through evidence requires a lot of translation, right? Cross-disciplinary translation, even with an academy, is hard, let alone what does it mean to do translation with broader and broader and broader communities. And yet that's a lot of what folks in this room have experimented with and built on and really excelled at. So I was thinking back to examples of some of the early days of work, of where we both succeeded and failed, because it's important to acknowledge not just what we learned from that are like, yay, big success, we won, but also moments where it didn't quite go as expected. And I remember there was a decade ago, a young man named Mike Brown was murdered by a police officer in Ferguson, Missouri. Many of you remember this. And in response, advocates began pushing for police-worn body cameras, believing that this would be the solution, a technical solution to a very complex social problem. The Obama administration at the time was like, yes, let's fund that tech. And a lot of folks in data society were like, is that really going to play out the way we imagined? And there was an amazing group of people who came together and reached out to different researchers, tried to map things, and we worked with the Leadership Conference in New America to bring together people that really had commitments to this, both researchers, but also practitioners and policymakers. And we held a workshop to really think this through. And what was really interesting about that workshop is that you'd have these moments where it was like passionate pleas, right? People wanted police accountability. There was no question about that. The question was how to achieve it successfully. And I will never forget this moment when, in a state of deep frustration, a man who represented the police union stood up and stared down an activist and said, I don't get it. I don't understand why you want to give me something where it means me surveilling you. And we were all kind of like, what just happened there, right? And the response was really informative, right? They stood up and said, I want to make certain that we can hold the police accountable. And that opened this conversation, right? Two different ideas of values, two different commitments, a set of research that showed the complexity of this. And the thing that was so notable is that at the end of the day, many of us expected that these tools would not achieve police accountability, but they would increase the fees, fines, and costs for local communities. And we were right. But there were also really good reasons for the Obama administration and for many of the activists to really hope that the technology would make a difference. A decade later, we're living in a world where data-driven algorithmic systems are everywhere. Back then, language was big data. Do you remember that? That was fun. Then we went into machine learning, and now we're on AI. Who knows what we're going to be tomorrow? Maybe you guys can invent the entertaining terms. But when I think about all of those components, I think about how there's this dream that technologies will solve a problem. And one of the things I think is important for us to remember is that there's not just a solution. It's not a cause or a solution. It's something that's complicated. And the work of data and society is to really complicate that process, to make certain that we look with an eye towards inequities. We look to an eye with inclusion. We don't go immediately to these binaries of it's all good or it's all bad. That's what is at the heart of this project in a powerful and powerful way. And so the questions that animate data and society were always important, but they're becoming increasingly important. And the kinds of cultures that we need in this new environment are also quite different. We need more complex networks because this conversation is so much larger than what it was a decade ago. So the latest wave of AI spectacles has only increased the importance of the work in this community. I think to all of the great things that are happening, right? How do technologies reconfigure work? What makes a system trustworthy? How do we understand the impact of systems? What is happening on the ground? How are people's health and well-being impacted? How do we ensure tech does not upend our climate? So I may have founded this organization, but this organization isn't me. It's all y'all. It's the work that has been done because of you collectively. It's the networks that exist today that brought you here. And it's the networks that are going to keep on going. Both what data and society does, but what all of you do as you help broaden the impact and effects of everything that's going on. So I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for taking my crazy idea and making it so much more than I ever could imagine. I am grateful. Thank you. And I'm supposed to turn it over to the amazing panel.
In 2007, former semiconductor floor worker at Samsung, Wang died from leukemia at the age of 22. She was one among countless floor operators responsible for testing and recycling chips exposed to carcinogenic chemicals, not in an industrial accident, but regularly in the workplace. In photos and film, her father kneels outside in public protest shrunken with grief, holding a framed black and white photo of his daughter. Hwang Yumi's parents would go on to form the coalition, Supporters for Health and Rights of People in the Semiconductor Industry, to demand justice and occupational regulations from the Korean government and Samsung, building on a long history of activism by semiconductor workers and their allies across the Pacific, like the Silicon Valley Toxics Coalition. As the days shorten and we surrender to autumn, to talk about a foreseeable future, I must start with death. All living beings on this planet share the same future. We all will die. Yet as monk Ajahn Sujart Abijato puts it, how we get to the coffin is another story. And as many of us here likely know, how we die is not equal. An untold number of us are not afforded a graceful death by old age and its illnesses, instead met with war, genocide, racialized and gendered violence, and the slow death of environmental injustice. Hwang Yumi's death was not a rare case. It is a death all too common. In a recent 2023 study, researchers found that among the majority female semiconductor floor operator workforce, there was a 3-fold increase in mortality from leukemia alone, along with elevated mortality rates of cancer and lymphoma. As I visit Hsinchu County in Taiwan, home of TSMC, the leading global fabricator of semiconductors and primary chip supplier to NVIDIA, I think of Hwang Yumi. In a taxi to the Hsinchu Science Park, where the pipes in TSMC's signature red poke out from glass-clad fabrication facilities, I think of how she died on her way to the hospital in her father's taxi cab. In the science park, I watch one cargo truck after another carrying containers of water and hydrochloric acid. Semiconductor manufacturing needs an enormous amount of ultra-pure water for the photolithography process, and TSMC uses an estimated 57,000 cubic meters a day in its Hsinchu fabs alone, which is 150 times the annual amount of water used by the average American household. In drought-stricken areas, TSMC has resorted to trucking in water. And while the industry overall aims to reuse 90% of its water, wastewater is inevitable, often treated and discharged to surrounding areas. In 2009, Angela Chen and her group of researchers at National Taiwan University found elevated levels of PFAS, or forever chemicals, in the river waters, fish, sediment, and rainwater surrounding the Hsinchu fabs. The amounts that her team found were astounding, 100 times the levels of comparable urban areas in Japan and the US. As some of you know, PFAS are called forever chemicals as they are difficult to break down, lasting thousands of years, remaining toxic to the earth and our bodies. Despite the known harms of PFAS, semiconductor industry lobbying groups have successfully managed to avoid environmental scrutiny and regulation. In the US, some environmental groups have raised these concerns after the passage of the CHIPS Act. And in Taiwan, as Hua Mei-Chu has documented, opposition to this green Silicon Island industry of chip manufacture has been drowned out by the geopolitical instability and economic development, in hopes that the US will offer protection to chip-producing countries like Taiwan, especially in this moment that self-proclaimed techno-optimists call a global AI arms race or an AI boom. In this AI boom, I am often told, stories about toxic exposure like Hwang Yumi's are pessimistic footnotes to a seemingly optimistic future filled with the possibility that AI will solve the industry's environmental impact, from creating full automation in fabs to someday more low-carbon, ethical extraction of resources for chips. I honestly can't think of anything more pessimistic in this logic. The conclusion that there is nothing that we can do in our present, so we just keep our current trajectory and work on more powerful neural nets. In the aftermath of Hurricane Hugo, Audre Lorde wrote, "The earth is telling us something about our conduct of living, as well as our abuse of this covenant we live upon. This covenant is not an end-user license. In response to our climate crisis, if we keep asking supply chain questions, if we keep asking carbon market questions, we'll keep getting the same answers. There are many of us, including those of us in this room, who are shifting toward a new conduct of living and computing, countless fellow researchers, artists, activists, and engineers. We recognize that computing must be redefined. It must have a different relationship with Earth. Our practices have a long history, growing upon the work that many of us who have imagined computation differently, who have continued solidarities between labor movements and tech, resisting the binary between software and hardware, who dream of things like dial-up internet via radio and homegrown networks. We know that our work is nothing short of reinventing what computation is. The materials and the know-how for reinvention are already here, not in some far-off future. And it's happening. Practices and pleasures of degrowth in parts of the global north, the juicy technical challenges around perma-computing, recycling, repair, consentful data practices, and stewardship, creating computational paradigms that do not dispossess, but instead can support sovereignty and life. To do so, we know that our tools deserve graceful deaths too. So, in this moment of autumn, let us hold the image of Wang Yumi's father. Hold the fact of death, of grief. Let us kneel before it until it carries us through into a different covenant of living and computing with this earth.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Ranjit Singh. I'm a senior researcher with the AI on the Ground team at Data and Society, where I research the impact of algorithmic systems. At Data and Society, we do socio-technical research. In this brief talk, I will introduce you to how to think like a socio-technical researcher and why that matters. In its most basic terms, socio-technical research argues that problems of technology are problems of society. I approach socio-technical research with four core basic assumptions. First, there is no such thing as a purely technical system. Second, every technical system is designed with a particular perspective and a vision to transform society. But this transformation does not happen equally for everyone. So paying attention to the differences in people's experiences with technical systems and where they lead is crucial for socio-technical research. Third, every technical system represents a set of choices. Choices that we make when we build these systems, and choices that we make when we live with these systems. Socio-technical research is focused on the nature of these choices, why we make them, and at whose expense. And finally, fourth, the relationship between technology and society is a two-way street. They mutually shape each other. So to see how these assumptions work together, let's take an example. Let's talk about the basic building blocks of large language models, transformers. Technically, transformers encode vast amounts of data into layers of internal representations, and then decode these representations to produce a meaningful response to any prompt. The novelty and success of transformers lies in their ability to direct attention. During the encoding process, attention helps in figuring out the relationship between these internal representations. And during the decoding process, attention helps in identifying what is important in coming up with a meaningful response. The title of the famous paper that actually calls out this ability is simply, "Attention is all you need." But in the process of identifying what it should be paying attention to, a transformer is essentially trying to answer, what will we, as people, pay attention to? Now that is a social and cultural question. What we pay attention to is a matter of our perspective. And we can see this happen in the most ordinary of ways. So for example, the title of the paper, "Attention is all you need," is inspired from a Beatles song, "All you need is love." And as they put it, there's nothing you can see that isn't shown. On the one hand, we are quite literally training large language models to answer questions to our liking through reinforcement learning from human feedback. This process is unequal in its very design. It prioritizes certain perspectives at the expense of others. On the other hand, we're also paying close attention to what transformers pay attention to in the hopes of learning new things from data. So in understanding how attention works, we can see all the core assumptions of doing socio-technical research play themselves out. But there are also challenges in doing socio-technical research, especially in studying the impact of large language models. AI enthusiasts imagine that large language models will disrupt every profession, ranging from medicine and law to coding and journalism. This stems from their belief that a reasonable amount of economically valuable work and professional expertise in the knowledge economy is simply a matter of processing language and managing conversations with clients. From this perspective, a language model should be able to do most of this work if it can just pay attention to what practitioners pay attention to. For example, talking to a patient about their symptoms to come up with a diagnosis. So on the other hand, if we think about it from a practitioner's perspective, what is crucial is that a model's outputs are consistent with their standards of professional care. This is not a trivial problem of AI adoption. It underlies a core tension between the practitioner's expertise and a model's capabilities. How much time should a practitioner put into training a model to do the work that they normally do? At what scale of AI adoption does all of this time become an appropriate return on their investment of efforts? Is it reasonable for us to imagine that in the future, people will first talk to a chatbot before talking to a human practitioner? Each profession will have to work out their answers to these questions. They'll have to manage the scale at which models can align with their practice, and then consider who gets left behind in this transformation. Thinking like a socio-technical researcher requires us to grapple with these choices. It requires us to cut through the arguments of inevitability of AI. And in the moments when we start paying attention to how we make choices about AI, we are all thinking like socio-technical researchers. We can ask, what does the given application of AI mean for us as individuals? What does it mean for the communities that we identify with? What does it mean for the work we do? For our professions? For our culture? For our places? For our countries? For the world we inhabit? And for all the other species that we share this planet with? These questions invite us to imagine and live in a society where AI is not a given, but a series of active choices. After all, we are products of the choices we make. Thank you.
In 2016, I attended a conference called the AWID Forum in Brazil. It was a huge gathering of feminists from all over the world, mostly global South countries, and it was truly eye-opening to me for a number of reasons. The biggest of these being that very few people wanted to talk to me about technology. I arrived fresh out of my digital rights and tech and society bubble, and honestly kind of thought it would be pretty simple to find something to connect with other feminist activists about. But it wasn't that simple. Some people very kindly said to me things like, "Oh, that's great that you do that. We work on real activism." To be fair, there were people who had been imprisoned because of their activism. There were people who had lost their ancestral homes because of the climate crisis. And in the face of those issues, I have to admit, the intersection of tech and social justice did seem a little bit intangible. In a couple of months, I'm going to the next AWID Forum, this time in Bangkok. And this time, I'm quite certain that the conversations will be really different. Nowadays, it's clear how technology has played a role in feminist movements and feminist struggles. And those new perspectives, those new connections, are in large part due to the hard work of organizations like the Numan Fund, the first dedicated fund for funding feminist tech in and for the larger world, who I've been lucky to be working with. Or organizations like Superlab, a Germany-based organization who bring an intersectional feminist analysis to digital policy and work with partners to bring people together across different spaces to converge on their struggles and work on them together, like through the African Content Moderators Union. What's become clear to me over the past years is that this kind of cross-movement building work is essential if technology is going to be seen and owned by different people in different spaces. And that kind of work takes time and intention, because ultimately building bridges across movements is the result of trusted relationships. And making those relationships happen takes the work of many people bringing many different communities together. And my friend Jack, a co-founder of the Numan Fund, calls these people free radicals, people who float between different spaces and see connections where others might not. I feel like I've come full circle in talking about bridge building and free radicals here at DNS, because my fellowship project here, while I was here, looked at precisely this, actually what I then called tech translation. Back then, I was looking at bridging contextual and technical skills in pursuit of building better technical products. 8 years later, here I am, still thinking about the in-between, the bridge building, the gaps, and the consequences of the silos that we find ourselves in today. And I'm actually more convinced than I've ever been that that kind of bridge building and network weaving, those gaps deserve attention and resources. That's why earlier this year, 2 colleagues and I co-founded an organization called Inter alia, based in Germany, where I live. Inter alia will be a fiscal sponsor that redistributes resources in ways that actually make sense for the emergent needs we see today. But we, together with others, also want to reimagine what those resources might look like in a holistic way. More specifically, what might it look like for fiscal sponsorship to be more than just transactional? Because here's what I'm seeing. Philanthropy just isn't built to deal with the emergent needs of civil society, nor to be able to redistribute resources in the agile ways that progressive social movements need. There are administrative hurdles and bureaucratic hurdles, and even once those are leapt over, an outsized amount of time and attention goes on meeting donor needs and expectations. At the same time, governments around the world are using intentional strategies to keep movement leaders stuck in administrative traps, as intentional way and explicit ways of weakening social movements. Everything from labeling a civil society organization as terrorist, to using anti-money laundering legislation to freeze assets, to prohibiting NGOs from existing at all. So here's what we're interested in at Inter alia. What might it look like for civil society to have a layer of infrastructure that acts as a sort of risk buffer, absorbing risk from civil society so that those on the front lines don't have to, because they shouldn't have to. We're thinking a lot about care and solidarity. What might it look like to build a brave space, a resilient space for civil society to grow and thrive and take chances when they want to and make mistakes? We want to make it easier for philanthropy to distribute resources in ways that meet the needs that they see in the field. And going back to my original interest, we want to make an intentional space for the bridge building work, for the movement building work, for the network weaving, and for filling in those gaps between tech and society spaces like the one today and other feminist and progressive spaces. So if doing any of that bridge building work is at all of interest to you, please come and find me later. I'd love to chat. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. For those of you I haven't met yet, I'm Michelle. I am a lifelong labor organizer and activist, and I now work at the Center for Labor and a Just Economy, thinking about the power relationship between technology companies and working class communities. And I have Data and Society to thank for my ability to do that. Since Data and Society has been founded, I have used their rigorous and human-centered research to help me, a person who has no socio-technical background at all, make sense of the stories that workers were telling me about the things that were happening in their workplaces as a result of the use of software. And I really taught myself, reading papers from Data and Society, how to think about that, and then was so warmly welcomed by the network of people in Data and Society when I called and asked my sometimes inane questions about what to do about a certain technological system. I always felt a sense of warmth and kindness and shared curiosity about the world around us. And that network and that work together has really netted some results. People like me who have been working inside social movement institutions alongside researchers and policymakers and many people in this room have been engaged in a joint project over the years to really figure out how we address the unchecked, concentrated power of companies in the state that have perpetuated harm against vulnerable communities through their use of technology. We have built expertise in capacity inside unions and advocacy organizations. We have used a combination of big public campaigns, collective bargaining contracts, and regulatory enforcement to push back against that power. And it has been incredible. It has happened relatively quickly, and we have built this growing field together. And yet, what do we know? It's not enough. Not that many people have collective bargaining contracts. We definitely know that. And the administrative state has been severely restrained by the Supreme Court's decision to destroy it through a series of rulings over the past summer. So we're in this moment of having worked together and needing to think very differently about the future and how we're going to do our work moving forward. And that different thinking really requires us to have a vision where we are able to articulate what it would mean for people to have democratic control over the economy, which includes control over things like innovation policy, the use of semiconductor and chip technology, the way automated and predictive systems are or are not deployed, and deciding whether we want our country to use its wealth to continue to engage in surveillance, colonialism, war-making, and extraction. And I think we have work to do in terms of asserting what that vision could be. I don't think we lack it. I think anyone engaged over the years in this work has something inside of our hearts and our imaginations that we know, we can see, that we want to get to, but sometimes we're scared to say what those things are because we don't know exactly how we're going to get there from here. And we can't actually know without welcoming even more people than we already have into our process. We have to expand our remit to invite people to develop our vision together and to start in places where we don't really know what's going to come at the end. We have to really start thinking about how we're not just researching harms, but imagining going somewhere together. And enacting that going somewhere together in forms in small ways every day in the way that we relate to the rest of the world until those pieces start to take hold. There is no plan. There will not be a plan. There is just us building a movement in acts of welcoming, curiosity, and care. And that is lovely, but it is grounded in nothing. So now I'm going to give you a plan. I want to offer everyone a kind of midpoint in time in this foreseeable future to think about how you might start organizing your work tomorrow or even tonight. Brother Sean Fain, the president of the United Auto Workers, has encouraged as many unions as possible to set their contracts to end on May 1st, 2028, thus setting the conditions for a real general strike. And here's the thing about general strikes. They're not about the details of a single contract. They are about a vision for a better world. When people march during a general strike, what they are marching toward is housing and clean water and time with their families and the things that make our lives truly better. They are marching, as the song goes, for bread and roses. So what would it take for all of us on May 1st, 2028, to be part of that vision? For there to be a vision of public technology systems that are accountable to people, that are controlled by people, that are democratically owned by all of us. Who do we have to be in order to be part of that story? How does your work become different tomorrow if you know you want to be there in 4 years? How are you preparing for the day after when we've won? We know that the power of technology companies is directly embedded in the structure of the economy. And we know that removing our labor from the economy is the single most powerful lever we have. So let's put those things together. I invite all of you into this imagining work. I invite all of you to join a cohort thinking about how we're actually going to build toward this midpoint in the future. And if you feel like it's too blurry and it doesn't make any sense, I'm just going to leave you with a little bit of inspiration from Starbucks. So I spent 10 years organizing with Starbucks baristas. Over the past couple of months, I've been talking to a lot of the people who unionize their stores about how unionizing changed their relationship to their communities and to democracy. And every worker I talked to, from Nashville to Tucson to Seattle to Long Beach, has said basically the same thing. That when they started their organizing and they were inspired by the first store in Buffalo, they said to themselves, it doesn't have to be this way. And when they started talking to their coworkers, the conversations always started with, it doesn't have to be this way. And they didn't know anything else other than that. But knowing that it doesn't have to be this way created a framework for them to get up every single day and build to a union that includes 500 stores today. Thank you.
Hello, hello. Hi, I'm Suresh Venkatasubramanian. I direct the Center for Tech Responsibility at Brown University. I'm also a Data and Society board member, and for years before that, I've been an active, enthusiastic participant in the work of Data and Society. I'm very glad to be here. Here to introduce our wonderful panel, folks who've been, as Charlton mentioned, part of Data and Society, past, present, and future. And I'll read out their short taglines, and I'll invite them on stage after that. First, my former boss, Alondra Nelson, is the Harold F. Linder Professor at the Institute of Advanced Study at Princeton University, an advisor and former board member at Data and Society. John Palfrey is president of the MacArthur Foundation and a former Data and Society board member. Felicia Wong is president and CEO at the Roosevelt Institute and a Data and Society advisor. Please welcome our panelists on stage. All right, so, grab your mics, yes, good. So, this is gonna be a short and quick panel. I'm gonna have 2 questions and we're just gonna riff. Or you're gonna riff, I'm just gonna watch the fun. So the first question is about sort of reflecting on Data and Society. It was founded as a research institute, as Dana said. It was grounded in qualitative work in the social sciences. And it was founded with big ambitions to put all the knowledge, all the research to work to make change in the world, in policy making, in media. But this path, going from research to policy, is something all of you have wrestled with over the years. And it's not an obvious path, it's not easy. And I think it's something we're still grappling with. So I guess the question is, what do you see as the levers of change? Alondra, would you like to go first?
Okay, I'm not going to answer that question right away.
Me either.
Good evening, everyone. I have Dana things to say to begin. So, and I'll get to the policy thing, and I'll be quick. So, I think I met Dana 15 years ago, and I think it was in around 2012, 13. Folks are here that remember Josh, Alice, others. Dana had started this book group, and we would meet fairly regularly in this book club. And Dana still does things like this virtually, but would bring together people to think together and to have conversation. And I think around 2013, at some point, on a sidebar after one of these conversations, Dana said to me, I think I'm gonna start an organization. And I was like, wow, what? Who does that? Dana Boy does that. It was just kind of like apropos almost of nothing. And she, had a plan and had an idea for it. And then, I don't know if it was a couple weeks or a couple months later, there were a group of us women at dinner. And we're at dinner, downtown. And Dana said, I think I found the space. And we were like, whoa, you're serious about this. This is like a thing. There's like a space. And so we went after dinner. After dessert, we walked to what would be the Data and Society space. And it was like unpainted walls. And, it was like the space was not built, but in her imagination, it had been envisioned. And it was just the most, I guess I want you all to imagine going from ideation to unfinished space to this moment tonight, and to really appreciate how much of that was the true force of nature, that is danah, and to appreciate also that quite a lot of that was also danah putting all of her personal capital and resources to bear on this work. Not just the building, I mean, we call it a field now, but she really understood that it had to be a community and built it that way intentionally. She also really appreciated from the very beginning, giving her work at Microsoft and her academic background, that it had to be what we now call multi-sector, but that was always kind of a natural thing for the data and society space. It was natural and a necessary thing. But danah could have had, I think a very good life at Microsoft that she still has as a partner. But she took Microsoft money, she took philanthropy money, she called in every chip and every marker to create this community. And so I want people to understand, I think someone earlier this evening used the word audacity, the audacity of a woman saying, I'm gonna start a new type of organization, not just an organization, but a new type of organization that brings together researchers and people from industry and policymakers, that breaks down the wall and says that anybody can be a researcher. I'm looking at Alex Rosenblatt, who wrote the world's best book on Uber. Yeah. As a fellow at Data and Society, not an academic, doesn't have a PhD, was a leader and is an intellectual leader in the field. And danah made that possible. And I want to point out, also that danah made space for women to do tech policy. In a way that was distinct. So, that must be said. Two other things, and then I'll get to your policy question. Another is that danah understood that this network building also meant building capacity in lots of other organizations. So we now have, those of us who work in policy spaces in Washington, D.C., we know there's something called the Civil Rights and Technology Table. Data and Society helped to build that Civil Rights and Technology Table, and to help a lot of these legacy civil rights organizations, of some of which we are members of and partner with, move from thinking about technology as sort of AT&T and as the principal relationship, and a really important relationship. I mean, these were historically sometimes communities that are still now trying to get broadband, but were then trying to get telephone cables, right? These were important alliances and conversations, but needed to be sort of moved, such now that we have this week, Senator Markey introduced the AI and Civil Rights Act, built off of model legislation that was introduced, that was created by the Lawyers' Committees for Civil Rights. So I mean, I want us to also understand the kind of impact of that work. And then the last thing I'll say, and I'll say a bit about policy, and then I'll allow my colleagues to speak, is that, I know I'm going on too long, is that this organization starts formally in 2014. It's also in 2014 that Data and Society and danah are asked to partner with the Obama administration to begin a set of conversations about what was then called big data and society. So you have an organization that's literally, not only in its first year, but in its first months, being entrusted with national level policy conversations because it was clear that danah was creating a new and necessary space that did not yet exist. And so I also want to say, that the people trusted danah and what she was building very early on to sort of steer national conversations in a new way and give them a different framing and a different shape. So what was your question about policy? I'm sorry, there was something about policy.
I've forgotten already. No, I'm kidding.
Okay, that was sort of a policy. I can pass to John, who's also gonna disobey.
Who just wants to hear Alondra Nelson talk all night? Is that anybody else? We just turn it over. Yeah, we're all good. And talk about women in tech policy. Somebody who has changed the world is Alondra Nelson. Woo! The first social scientist to lead the... Anyway, keep going. Suresh introduced Alondra as his former boss. I can now say Alondra is one of my bosses as a board member of MacArthur Foundation, which I'm delighted about. I am going to disobey. If you really want an answer to the question, I can try.
I've already given up. It's
This
fine.
was this. No, you'll actually answer the question, and it'll be awesome. We were told this wasn't supposed to be a Data in Society or a Dana Fest. It is. We're doing it, and so I am going to devote my couple cycles to 2 Dana stories as well, because I think they're illustrative, and they sort of answer the question. Because I think the answer to the question is a combination of audacity and vision. So that's the answer, and then Felicia can answer it seriously. Oh, that's a serious answer. So story number 1 about Dana, this was, I don't know, 2006-ish, and I was working at Berkman Center with this amazing group of fun people thinking about these things, but really a bunch of lawyers, and we were lucky that we had some people like Ethan Zuckerman and Catherine Bracey and others who are here in this room who are trained otherwise, but it was a pretty staid and pretty homogeneous group, I will admit, and we were interested in some things, looking around for how we could break things open and so forth. And I was interested particularly in youth and technology at that time. And I looked around the world and said, who is studying youth and technology and did that work that you can do in academia, and just read a ton of stuff. And the answer just kept coming back with the same answer, Dana Boyd, Dana Boyd, Dana Boyd. Dana Boyd at that point, let's be clear, was not Dr. Dana Boyd. Dana Boyd was in a PhD program, but already fully changing the world, which I think is part of your Alex story in a moment. And she was, when approached, I think by me, in a conversation to become a fellow at Berkman Center, she said, join the Island of Misfit Tours, of course I'm in. So anyway, she jumped into the mix, and the first thing that in a way we ended up doing together was something called the Internet Safety Technical Task Force. This was 49 state attorneys general, and I think it was Texas that was not, right? But in any event, go figure. And it turned out to be sort of a setup. It was kind of complicated. Don't need to go into all the detail. But it was a combination of technology companies, researchers, and so forth. And it seemed like the people who had started it had put us up to coming up with an answer, was that kids needed to have driver's licenses before they went on the internet. That was sort of the premise. But remember, this is like MySpace time and Facebook and others kind of early on. And so we did all this research, and we came out with the answer that there are all these things we can do to keep kids safe, and we absolutely should be, kids first and all the rest, but a driver's license was not among those particular things that we ought to do. And Dana, of course, had corralled the research and so forth. And Dana and I were on a call with unnamed attorneys general and their staff, who pounded the table when we said, no, we were going to recommend some other stuff. And they were furious, I mean, really mad. And the senior staff person to this one attorney general said, I don't care what the data say, find new data! And here I am with Dana Boyd, and we are staring down these guys. Anyway, I was so glad that that it was Dana who was the one who was standing for all of research and all of social science. We did not find new data, as you can imagine. We were persona non grata, still are, with those leaders. Anyway, that was one of the introduction, just like backbone, vision, clarity, network. That was number 1. Number 2 story on Dana on this was being able to be part of the founding board, as Alondra was, and being in this incredible group. Such a joy to see, and then to see what it's become, and just have a few minutes there with the group. And there was a point at which we had to draw straws and roll off and so forth. In the spirit of good governance, I was rolling off first as a board member, and I loved the conversation. We were talking about who would join next. And I was rolling off, and there was a conversation, do we need another token white male cis, whatever guy? And everybody said, no, actually we don't, but it might be okay to have a lawyer. Anyway, I knew that this was it was actually a true story. Anyway, I think part of it is, how do you set the table? What does the room look like? Who is involved? How do you do it? And what is the backbone with which you carry out the work?
Great. I'm getting word from the organizers that the first person to actually answer the question will get a free drink afterwards. So, Felicia.
Can you hear me? I think I might actually have to answer the question, because I just don't have as many Dana stories. But I will say that Data and Society, as a force in New York research, think tank, social change life, and the Roosevelt Institute, which I run, which is also in New York and does think tank, social change kind of stuff. We have often run into each other, obviously now. Thanks to Janet, I am more formally part of the Data and Society Network, but I do remember that sort of empty, cavernous space, because I was in, Dana, you invited me to a meeting, it must have been in like 14 or, I don't know, whenever the space was still very empty, to talk about labor, algorithms, and the economy. And, you know, I learned about ghost work, and I learned, I think Michelle Miller might have been there, but at any rate, I have always admired the way that you saw that the research, tech research, but just research, frankly, economic research, it just has to start with people. Has to start with people, has to start with relationships. And by the way, I know we're all nerds, but you know, even nerds occasionally like a glass of wine and a good party, and so you've got to do that to make the research real and meaningful. So anyway, I have always, I think there is a fan here. No, it's good. I'm good. Anyway, so I have that's my slim Dana story. I still remember that meeting. I still remember learning about ghost work. So I am going to answer the question, though, Suresh, because otherwise I'll have nothing else to say. So you asked about how you go from research to policy, levers of change, theories of change. You didn't say theories of change, but you could have. And one thing I just want to put on the table, I have always so admired Data and Society's approach that is, it's about rights, it's about a Bill of Rights, it's about human rights, and that is absolutely fundamental to, you all know this, that's why you're in this room. But I want to put another lever of change, another set of lenses on the table, which is the lens of our political economy, right? Because, and Michelle sort of alluded to this, but the political economy into which a big new technology is born or socialized or frighteningly commercialized, that political economy really shapes what happens to the technology. And by political economy, I mean the common sense for who gets to own stuff, who gets to govern stuff, who gets to decide on those things. And our political economies obviously shift. You know, if AI had come of age in a very different time in our history, it might already, even in its relatively, you know, young development, it might already look pretty different. You know, I think a lot about nuclear technology. I know you do too, the nuclear era. It matters that nuclear technology came of age in the FDR era. It matters. We got a highly regulated, highly militarized system, because it also obviously came of age during World War II, but we ended up with Los Alamos, we ended up with the Manhattan Project, but we ended up with a highly, highly, highly regulated system. So that was nuclear technology, right? The internet came of age 50 years later in the Clinton-Gingrich era. You know, Clinton talked about a bridge to the 21st century, but instead we got like endless digital ads, we got data extraction. It was not inevitable that, you know, ads had to be the model for driving, but, you know, ask Newt Gingrich and that's what you get. And obviously we're still living with that. And so today, AI is coming of age in what I think of as an interregnum, right? The old, like the days of what's good for free enterprise is good for America, those days are over. Like, you can't legitimately say that with a straight face and just believe that whatever the market is going to do is going to be good for human beings. You cannot, and for workers. You can't say that anymore. But what comes next is very, very unclear. And so, a huge technology coming of age in this interregnum, it is totally unclear the mindset within which we are going to even make choices about governing AI. So, you know, you could have a nuclear regulatory model where the default answer is no. You could have a bank regulation model. We know that banks have a lot of power and they can be pretty dangerous. We've seen that. Well, the bank regulation model isn't an automatic no, but, you know, regulators go to banks. They act as auditors. They sit there. They go through the books. Like, that is, they go through stress tests. That's how we regulate banks. You could have an FDA model where, you know, companies have to apply for a license before they're allowed to sell something to the public. And I could go on, but the point is, like, we have to think about how we're thinking about the problem, in addition to thinking about the in order to think about what it means to be human-centered. So that is what I will offer in the actual sort of one policy, put one policy lever on the table.
That's great, and I think I want to riff on that a little bit for the next question, really. This point of the interregnum, the idea that we're in a place where it is ambiguous and unknown, and the future is sort of cloudy. So then if we are back here in 10 more years, right, at Data Society's 20th anniversary, and we're now talking about what's happening next in the next 10 years, and I was thinking about, Ranjit's point earlier about choices, and others have talked about how we construct the world out of choices we make. It's not something that just happens to us. Where are the buttons we should be pushing now? What are the choices we need to be making now so in 10 years we're in a place we want to be, as opposed to a place that maybe we didn't want to be and then we're regretting 10 years from now? So I'll just throw it out to the group in any order. Anyone would like to start?
I would say, and folks who know me will have heard me say this, you've got to be ready for what happens when you win. And I think that part of what this moment is the successful creation of a community in a field, the successful ability, Ranjit did such an eloquent job of sort of explaining what socio-technical is, of making that a policy option for framing how you think about technology that didn't exist a decade ago in a lot of conversations. And so, I think the challenge for us and the sort of goal for us is to figure out what's next, because we've actually succeeded. And I think a lot of the work that we did was as underdogs and sort of not being at the table and forcing your way to the table and sort of forcing conversations about reframing how to think about technology and policy together. And so I actually think this interregnum is very much a back to the woodshed moment. And I think it is a moment in which we have to imagine resistance. I mean, there is actual resistance, but I think a lot of the creativity and innovation and ideation came out of an actual sense of resistance, whether that was sort of people not seeing the world in the way that you did, or administrations that had a different kind of agenda and vision for technology. And so I think we need to, it's not so much about buttons and levers. I think that we have, if we think about President Biden's executive order on AI, there's a lot of tools in there that people here have worked to help manifest: auditing and red teaming and risk assessments and those sorts of things that you helped as a co-founder of FACT to sort of bring to the world as a legitimate way of thinking about these things. So I think it's really a time right now for kind of wild visions, kind of totally moving the Overton window, and not just moving from socio-technical to the worlds we want. If AI is a powerful and transformative new technology, what do we want it to look like at its best? Or maybe we don't want it to look like, whatever that is. I think we really need to be able to offer that and fully formed strategies and narratives that we don't yet have. One of the things I often say is that in the AI space is, as speculative as it is, and for people to say AGI is coming and the robots are coming, it's equally speculative to say AI is going to end educational inequality. And the challenge is if we want, or it's going to cure cancer. There's on both sides, it's complete speculation, because we've not yet created pathways or plans or the constraints or the renewable energy pathways, all of the things you might need to sort of make those things possible. And so I think to get to a next 10 years that, to still be around in 10 years, I guess, is in part an exercise of ideation that's about whole world making, about the rightful place of these tools, whether or not we want them there, and what those worlds look like.
Would you like to go next?
Sure. I think you are so right, Alondra, that what's next after you win, what's next after you have created a community that sees itself as such and wants to do more. I think, and you're doing this in an interregnum. I mean, interregnums are times when wild imagination is actually possible because the rules are entirely unclear. So this is a time where more winning is possible, but that is going to take a lot of courage because I also think we're at a time, obviously we're on the eve of an election, someone else will be president at some point in 39 days, maybe, in the near future, foreseeable future. And that means a lot of people are going to get a lot of policy jobs, right? A lot of people are going to get a lot of policy jobs. And now when you all have created a kind of new common sense that human beings ought to be central to thinking about technology, I really hope that the Roosevelt Institute has helped create a new common sense where human beings and workers should be central to the economy. But this means that there are a lot of jobs, obviously OSTP jobs, obviously NIST jobs, jobs that are, actually technology jobs, where we should get a lot of great people from the, from this room should think about those kinds of jobs. But there are also other jobs that you wouldn't think to contest for, but you could now. What about jobs in the Treasury Department? Definitely jobs in the Commerce Department. What about jobs in the National Economic Council? What about jobs at the Domestic Policy Council? What about jobs at OMB? I'm not saying that, it's my job to say that governance matters, and I'm not saying governance is the only thing. But I do think that governance really matters, and it takes courage to think that okay, I'm actually going to step into a role where I'm going to make the rules, or I'm going to make sure that the president's EO not only continues but is actually implemented well. That's going to be on me and so we are in this moment. You all. And I think those of us who are in the political economy space do, we are in this moment where we have to actually say, what's it going to mean to step from the outside to the inside? And last thing I'll say about this, when we do this, we need to do it together because you do not want to be the only person in that room. You do not, you want to, if you're at the, Department of Treasury, well, actually, if you're at the Department of Labor, you better have an ally at Treasury. If you are at the Domestic Policy Council, you better have 3 allies at the National Economic Council. You better have people who understand that your budget matters, that your hiring authority matters. So this is kind of a time to go all in. No matter what happens in this election, now is a time where someone's going to write the rules, and it might as well be the people in this room.
Hear, hear. That's so good. I'll be super brief and actually try to answer the question this time about where we are 10 years from now. I would submit that I'm among those naive people that 25 years ago thought technology could broadly be a force for good toward the kind of multiracial democracy I want to live in. And I don't think it, roughly speaking, has been.
I thought the internet was going to be a library.
Well, it did that yeah. Another conversation.
Supreme Court has struck that down.
Yeah, seriously. There is a role for lawyers still in this whole thing. We can stand, but basically, I do not think it has been a progressive force over 25 years. There are some good things about it, but I would love to see in this next 10 years that by virtue of this incredible diverse set of big brains and incredible workers, that we can together make it genuinely a force for that. And obviously, we have consequential elections and various things between here and there, but I do think that we can learn from the last quarter century and take a different course. And I think it's going to take this incredible group that has been broken open and reconstituted and turned into a network by Janet and all of you and Dana, of course, and happy to be arm in arm and in solidarity with all of you in that fight.
On that note, I just want to thank our panelists. Thank you very much. Now, please welcome the Executive Director of Data and Society, Janet Haven, to come in.
Before the big talk, really. This is so great. I love seeing this room of people. I love being in community with all of you. This is just wonderful. Thank you all for being here. 10 years ago, I attended the public launch of Data and Society. I wasn't on the stage, I was in the audience, and I found myself listening to those lightning talks. Catherine Bracey, where are you, Catherine? There you are, talked about data and organizing. Solon Barakas talked about big data's disparate impact. Where are you, Solon? You're in here somewhere, I know I saw you, there you go. And I felt completely galvanized by the vision that I was seeing that night. At that point, I had spent more than 10 years working at the intersection of human rights and technology. And I had been so frustrated by this dominant narrative that technology was a value add no matter what the context, that there was an inherent social good in using technology because it would solve poverty, it would solve inequality, it would solve government corruption. It was a force that could not be challenged. And that was our future, whether we wanted it or not. And then at Data and Society's launch in 2014, I saw this different future. I saw people who were coming together to question that premise, to ask what's really happening here, rather than accepting that tech should decide our future for us. What if we made the values that were underlying that technology visible and then intentionally chose different values? What if grounded knowledge centered the voices and experiences of people who are rarely heard to decision makers? What I was hearing that night was visionary because it allowed for a complicated and a nuanced story about technology and society to emerge. And it also allowed a story to emerge about power and who holds it. So we all, and I really mean all, have traveled a long way together in the past 10 years. It isn't a fringe idea anymore, as we have heard tonight, that data-centric technologies, that AI have real impacts on society, that these impacts can be harmful and racialized, and that they fall disproportionately on marginalized groups. And Data and Society, I am very proud to say, has been a major contributor to changing that narrative. As the AI drumbeat has gotten louder, we have doubled down on social science as a critical input that centers people in AI governance, in standards, in policymaking, using that socio-technical lens that Ranjit talked about. We've ramped up our efforts to translate research into policy as the Biden administration made a push, led by people in this room, there you are, to govern, to meaningfully govern AI with people at the center. So today, we have the blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights. We have an executive order on AI. We have rules for how federal agencies evaluate AI systems for rights and safety violations before they are put into use. These are early ideas that we champion that are now, in some cases, enacted policy. And they are real wins. And I think we should take them as wins. Everyone should feel those victories. That was our first 10 years. It's been a lot. So I want to talk about the future. It feels like an understatement to say right now, at the end of September 2024, that we face huge challenges to democracy, to justice, the United States, globally. And we know the stakes of these fights. We need to imagine, given those stakes, what we want our relationship to technology to look like, and how we create the conditions for that to happen. So that's what I want to walk through, 3 ways that we're going to do that at Data and Society. First, this is not going to surprise anyone. We start from research. Our research foregrounds questions about power and justice. We center people who are on the margins. And we prioritize field study over simplistic narratives of technology. And I am very, very happy to announce that our research will be led as we move into our next decade by our next Director of Research, Dr. Alice Marwick. Alice, right back there. Welcome back, Alice. I'm also very excited to announce tonight a new research project that we're launching on the environmental impacts of AI, and this is supported by a grant from the National Science Foundation. Thank you. So this isn't a project to, for instance, study the energy consumption of data centers, and that's an important issue. But we'll be working on an equally important issue: how the communities who live around data centers are impacted by resource-intensive computing, and what that means for how we measure and ultimately govern the environmental impacts of AI. This is exactly the kind of urgent research that we need to do to shift power towards the people who have not had a voice. So the second thing that I want to talk about that we need to do is that we need to build political power, both as an organization and as a field. We have done a great job over the past 10 years of building our research heft and policy depth. Our next challenge is to strengthen and wield our power. It is not enough to simply inform policymakers. We've seen that over and over again. We need to better use the levers of power to push for a future in which technology is being governed in the public interest. And to do that, third, and I really want to call back to our speakers, particularly Zara and Michelle, to do that, we need to broaden the field of people and groups who see technology's impact on society as their issue, not a separate topic for, love you all, STS scholars and tech policy wonks. Okay, we need more people in this fight. It has to be an interconnected and intersectional fight. We need to work with movements for democracy. We need to work with groups who also see ungoverned technology as a threat to their rights and their freedoms. We need to work with workers and unions who are seeing the impacts of these systems on their lives every single day. Partnership is going to be critical for our next decade. So my ask for all of you is that every single one of us here tonight is going to play a role in this work over the next decade. You may be producing insightful research, many of you are. You may be helping to sustain our work. You may be shaping the advocacy that we need to do or organizing within your own communities, but we are all needed. And I believe that when we gather again in 10 years, that we will have wins that are worth celebrating. Thanks, everyone. All right. I'm not leaving yet because there are so many people that I want to thank. I'm going to run through this quickly, but just know that I wish I could. I mean, if I said it all, it would take another hour. I want to thank our speakers tonight. They have all been fantastic. Thank you. Thank you all. I want to thank our staff, the staff at Data and Society who have made this incredible event happen. It has been all hands on deck, and they could not have been more amazing. All of you are fantastic. I want to thank our board of directors, who are wonderful. Thank you all. Our funders. So many of you have been with us for a long time. Thank you. And of course, Dana Boyd, my longtime friend and collaborator. Love you. And I want to thank all of you who are here in person, all of you who have joined us online. So many of you are part of this network, have been part of this network over the past 10 years as fellows, researchers, affiliates, advisors, staff from across the past 10 years. It means so much that all of you are here. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Janet, for giving us all our marching orders. Please give Janet another round of applause. Thank you for your leadership and stewardship of Data and Society, which has not only blazed the trail for our last 10 years, but has built the strong foundation we need to aggressively fight for that future that is up to us to bring to fruition. I want to echo Janet's thanks to so many who have made DNS what it is today, especially, again, my fellow board members, as well as a special thanks to all of Data and Society's staff and leadership. You're the best at what you do. I am always amazed at the work that you do day in and day out to power this great organization. Speaking of, we are delighted to showcase many of the great books published by Data and Society's staff, board, advisors, affiliates, alumni, and our broader network, including tonight's speakers. So to learn about some of those more than 75 titles written by members of our network, please make sure to find your way to that corner of the building over there where they are on display in our DNS book showcase. As we continue to celebrate what we've achieved over the past 10 years, I'm going to sound a familiar refrain that's already been started. Don't forget that we are also here to plot, plan, and strategize for the years ahead. As you prepare to head off to the reception, look around the room. The grown-ups are not coming to save us. We are it. It is on us. There is amazing power in this room and our extended room in those joining us online, but our strength does not lie in our own individual awesomeness, awesome as we all are. Our strength lies in us working together, supporting each other, setting agendas and executing plans together across each of our domains of influence, whether in higher education or government, philanthropy, the private sector, civil society, or other spaces where we can advocate change. I invite you all to join us at the bar. And on your way to grab that glass of whatever you're drinking, meet some new friends, reconnect with old ones, and make some plans to do the urgent work that lies ahead of us all. Thank you and good evening.